There is a subsurface sewer that runs the length of this street. Again, indicating the wealth. Not all streets have subsurface sewage to take the rainwater and sewage away. This is a unique piece over here that you can't find anywhere else. Several years ago at this nymphaeum, this is one of the 6 nymphaeums, that is decorative fountains, 2 stories in height, would have been beautiful. They've restored it to some degree but haven't built it up entirely. But this piece was found as one of the columns in the nymphaeum. And as you can see, we have 2 items here. Actually 4 items. We have a menorah, which is lit, and then we have flanking the menorah on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, we have a lulav, which is to commemorate Sukkot, and then on the right-hand side we have a shofar, and that is the ram's horn that is blown in the temple to indicate the time of the sacrifice for the nation. Now, what I think is very interesting, what makes this unique, is that we have a cross that is emanating from and extending from the menorah. What do we make of that?
It's either Byzantine at the beginning, and then that was etched on afterwards.
Yes, it is a Byzantine cross that was added later on in time, but it indicates that the church emerged from the synagogue. And this is what we see consistently throughout the Acts of the Apostles. Paul always goes to the synagogue first. Why? Because he realizes that the Jewish people have been commissioned to be a nation, a priestly nation, not to keep the truth to themselves, but to share that truth of what they learn of God with the rest of the Gentile world. Now, because of historical developments that have taken place that you read about in the Old Testament, the Jewish people became introverted rather than extroverted. They really closed in on themselves. Okay, so Paul, his mission is to go throughout the Gentile world, visiting synagogues all over the place and reminding them of their mission. Okay, and he finds mixed results. Okay, but again, the church begins in the synagogue, and this is what's indicative of what's going on here.
You see it lit.
Now, something else I want to note, okay, is that the Jewish symbols are not defaced. What does that tell you? It tells you of coexistence.
It wasn't replacement theology, it was the extension of.
Yeah.
It's a full picture.
In other words, the Jewish community and the Christian community coexisted with one another. Sometimes we know that religions, there's a measure of animosity. Muslims don't get along with Christians, who don't get along with Jews, and Jews and Christians don't always get along with one another. But what we've got here is an early symbol where the cross emerges from the synagogue. Christianity came from Jewish roots, but yet the Jewish symbols, all 3 of them, are not defaced.
So you might address...
What is this here?
That's the lulav.
That's the palm branch.
And then we've got a tripod base. It's broken right here, but these items down at the bottom, it's a tripod base, which is, upon which they...
So as the Christian community began to grow and separate itself from the unbelieving Jews, and the Jews having the right to worship one God under the Roman rule, did they create an animosity so that the Jews basically encouraged the persecution of the Christians?
Yes, to some degree. Now, it varied throughout the empire. Sometimes the Jewish community was cooperative with the Christians, even though they didn't embrace the faith. But what we read about consistently in the Acts of the Apostles is that the disbelieving Jews make life very difficult for the Jews who do convert to Christianity and for the Gentiles who convert to Christianity.
That hasn't changed.
And that is the reason why, personally, I think like this is not like only a very very friendly way of expressing that, because the menorah is in a way destroyed. So it's just like I personally see this as the triumph of Christianity over the synagogue of Satan.
I don't think I
But-
don't think your interpretation is correct in thinking that the synagogue is the synagogue of Satan.
Well,
I think you have to
disbelieving.
distinguish what that means.
It's
I mean,
saying that the
as
cross is
you
in
know,
the
I'm not
center.
sure if that is in all due respect. But there is usage of
This
motifs in
yeah,
Christianity
this is like
that
the
want to show this triumph of the church over Judaism, which is, I think, a problem, a historic problem.
That's- you
I
think-
And a
mean,
design
the only
problem.
reason
You
which
think
makes me say that is the cross is right in the middle of the
Right,
menorah
it's
over there.
emerging
If
straight from
it's
the center.
I mean, to a more emerging drawing, if you will tell me to do an emerging drawing, I can just put the cross over here, not onto the menorah itself. I mean, my thinking. I'm not saying this
I
is
think
the
it's
way.
Well, it's
centered. I
it's in the centerpiece too, which is nice.
It's
I mean,
centered.
because you have the light of the
Well,
world,
and
which
that's
is
the candle
Yeshua,
that stays lit all the
Jesus.
time.
But they probably they can be, it's beautiful and it can be problematic at the same time. Depends on how you look at it.
Well, many of the early church fathers and later church fathers were very hostile against
The Jewish people.
Judaism, but it also, well, why were they? Because many of the people, the normal everyday Christians, had a great fascination with the roots of their faith. You know, so Chrysostom, when he goes off on the Jewish people, it's precisely because people in his congregation are going to the synagogue to try and connect to their Jewish roots. And it's like, no, don't do that. It's horrible. It's bad. But I would see this as Christianity is on the foundation of Judaism.
Yeah.
Right.
Am I supposed to touch that?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, really not a good idea.
Right.
Later on today, we're going to go to Aphrodisias, and there's no other city in all of Turkey, and for that matter, in the diaspora, where you see a stronger Jewish presence. We'll see much of that when we get there. And what you do see there is Jewish symbols that are defaced, and it's pretty clear that they're defaced. Now, not all the Jewish symbols are defaced, but some of them are.
And that would be expected. I mean,
Yeah.
there was definite
There,
hostility.
there were hostilities back in those days, and so one might expect some of that. But this here, at least to me, this indicates coexistence in the fact that we have the cross emanating and growing out of the menorah tells me that the early Christian community is acknowledging its debt to Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. The apostles were Jews. The Old Testaments were not jettisoned, were not thrown away. The Old Testament scriptures were a part of the Jewish or the Christian scriptures as well.
and Paul even says to the Jew first and then to the Gentile.
Mhm. Now, one other factor that we need to take into consideration, I mentioned this the other day, and that is as we progress throughout the first century, perceptions of the Christians change. To begin with, Christianity is thought to be a sect of the Jews, like the Pharisees, Sadducees, and others, okay? But by the time we get into the latter part of the second century, most of the people who are now a part of the church are not Jews anymore. They're Gentiles. And that's when the imperial perspective changes, okay? Since you folks are now Gentile people, former polytheists, the expectation is you don't get the exemption that the Jews get, okay? Instead, you're expected to go to the imperial festivals, go to the imperial temples, and do your votive duty, you know, to show your patriotism, to show that you're a part of the team. And if you refuse to do so, then the suspicion is that Christianity is, well, they're undercutting the Roman Empire itself. And that's part of what is happening here in Laodicea, is that Domitian doesn't give the Christian community a free pass. Expectation is, you're going to worship me.
And that's got to create animosity between the time.
It's good question. Good question. The menorah itself is stylized. What I mean by that, it acquires a standardized form. Okay, So you've got the 7-branch menorah with a bar across the top, and then the tripod base. That's indicative of the Byzantine period, probably the early Byzantine period. Okay, so that's probably when this was etched. And then the cross that comes out of it, you can clearly see that that's later on in time. I don't know how much later in time, 100 years later, but again, it would be early Byzantine period.
So the timing of that menorah would be, in your guess, about what time?
Oh, it's hard to date it specifically, but I would say early Byzantine period, probably the early 4th century. And then how much later, you know, it's only a guess to try and determine when the cross was etched into it.
But the cross looks very much like the cross that we had seen in Hagia Irene in Istanbul, by means of the style, the shape, proportion of the height and the wings.
We know that Jews were economically prosperous, so it would not be surprising to find Jews in an economically prosperous Quad City region. You know, so and the Christians were prospering alongside, shoulder to shoulder with the Jews, probably involved in commercial endeavors together with the Jews. And they're just, I don't think, my own personal opinion is, I don't think